Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership Dialogues from Retailers Association of India. Friends, over the last 1.5 years, the retail industry has undergone unprecedented change. Today, we are going to have some deliberations with our guest who is going to share his insights on the current status of the retail industry, what steps are required for the survival and enablement of the retail industry, how can the various stakeholders come together and help this revival, and what are the lessons learned from this crisis. Also, we look forward for the next 6 months horizon. With this, I would like to welcome our guest for today, Mr. Bijou Kurien, Chairman, Retailers Association of India. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Hitesh. Thank you very much, and I hope you're keeping well and safe.
Thank you, sir. Likewise, hope all well at your end as well.
Absolutely.
Sir, I would like to start with this question. That what are the things in retail that have changed due to this pandemic over the last 1.5 years?
Well, I think, when you think of what has changed, think of it from, I would say, the perspective of three stakeholders in retail. One is the retailer himself or herself. The second is the consumer. And the third is the government and all other stakeholders involved in the conduct of retail, which are suppliers, landlords, etc. If you look at it from the consumer's perspective, the first thing that you should have noticed, and certainly last year, was that needs continue, irrespective of whether there is a lockdown or not. And because of which, what happens is that the consumer tries to find ways and means of being able to fulfill those needs. So if I have the need for food, then I try to make sure that I get food. If I have the need for clothing, I try to make sure that I fulfill that particular need for clothing. And what we discovered in that whole process was that retailers who adapted themselves to the requirements of the situation. So if the government said lockdown, stores are not to be opened, but on the other hand, allowed, for example, deliveries to be made to houses, many retailers figured out, even though they were not e-com players, as to how to be able to deliver to a house. If earlier they thought WhatsApp was largely for groups, now they figured out that they can create WhatsApp groups out of their customers. If for example, they were reluctant to even put a computer in their store, many of them said, I'll put a computer and I will computerize my inventory and computerize my CRM data and make sure that I'm accepting digital payments, etc. And this was not something that just happened to the large retailer. Also small retailers. You see footpath vendors spreading a gunny bag on the pavement and keeping vegetables there. And in the middle of all of that, there is a QR code. You have a pushcart vendor who's going around with a QR code in the middle of the onions, so that you can actually pay also when you're there. So what you're seeing is that the digitizing of retail, whether it's in terms of being able to connect with your customer, whether it's in terms of accepting payment, whether it's in terms of making your inventory visible to the customer, all of that was in an overdrive with the retailer. And many retailers, whether they were what you might define as mom and pop or traditional or whatever way you call them, everybody, large and small, actually transformed themselves to be able to adapt to these surroundings. The second is the what I might define as the government. The government, on the other hand, figured out that people will have needs, and you have to be able to figure out a way to balance between the spread of the pandemic and the needs of the people. So in many cases, they encouraged NGOs to get into the act and start providing food parcels. In some cases, cooked food, and in some cases, dry rations, and provided them to the people who actually required it. The third was in the area of the companies themselves. And a lot of these companies actually stepped up the act. They connected virtually with the customers who are these retailers and ensured that they somehow or the other managed to keep the supply chains going and deliveries to be made despite the challenges which are there. So, what you can see is that mall developers came into the act, landlords came into the act, and all of them were willing to work together to be able to adapt to the situation, to keep commerce running, and to make sure that finally the needs of the customer were met, whatever be the ground situation. And I think that was the first time we saw all these players getting together and working together to be able to help the customer.
Digitization of retail, I think that's one of the key points that we can take as a boon. And it's not a boon really, but then that's an imperative that this COVID got on us. And the whole retail industry across has digitized. And the example that you gave of the food vendor also on the roadside is it's something which is fascinating in terms of we could have never imagined that a food roadside vendor would be using a QR code for his or her payments. And obviously the supply chain and all the other points that you mentioned, sir, has I think these have been transformed in the last 1.5 years. So taking this point ahead, sir, with the challenges that we are facing today in the country, what needs to be done for retail today in the country? What are the immediate steps that can help survive and enable sustain the revival of retail?
So I think one of the things that all of us in the retail community should understand, should have confidence in, should believe in, is in the consumption potential that exists within the Indian market. There will be hiccups, and these hiccups would have happened because of temporary disruptions in terms of either the ability to buy or the ability to sell. And sometimes people are affected because they lost a job or their salaries have been reduced, and thereby their ability to buy has been hampered. And sometimes because of lockdowns or because of regulations, retailers have not been able to deliver or to be able to sell, and that has disrupted the ability to sell. But leaving aside those hiccups, what we have seen is that we saw a wonderful quarter, which was Q3 of the last financial year, October to December. And we saw it steadily improving. October, November improved upon October, December improved upon November, January was very good, February was very good. Then, unfortunately, after the 15th of March, things started sliding again because the fear of the pandemic started coming into the people's minds. So, what we must believe is that there is an opportunity for us to be able to tap on the unspent potential that the consumers offer for us in India. So, that's the first thing we must keep in mind. The second is that while that exists, we must find a safe way of being able to address that potential. Currently, the way the government has seen it is that the safest way is let the customers sit in the house, you sit in your store. Stores are not to be kept open. If you want, you can go and deliver. That's the only thing that the customer has actually defined. And in some states, they have said, okay, between 6 to 10 for a short period of time, you're allowed to keep your stores open so that customers can come in and take whatever is required and go back. Uh, in the case of restaurants, they've encouraged them to be able to do delivery at home. Last time, many of them were allowed to also offer pickups for customers at the restaurant, but this time they said, most of what you do will be delivery at home and no pickup at the restaurant. So in several ways, they have tried to ensure, the government has tried to ensure that safety is maintained in the transaction, because it is difficult for consumers to manage for weeks on end, sometimes even months on end, without being able to go to a store and only buying online. So that's one of the second thing that the government has also done. The third is that, unlike last time where it was a complete lockdown, in wave 2, what they have said is that it's somewhat like a partial lockdown, but it is well controlled. It is not about saying shut the tap fully. It's about saying tap can be opened, but I will actually regulate the amount of water that can flow through the tap. So that's the way the government has actually looked at it. And I think it's a good tactic, because to some extent, economic activity in some form or the other, whether it is manufacturing, whether it's in terms of distribution and supply chain, all of those are continuing. Last year, we all remembered how difficult it was sometimes to find products on the shelves of a grocery store. This year, on the other hand, we are not seeing those kind of shortages which are there. And in fact, FMCG companies are saying that we have more to supply, unlike last year where they said that we don't have enough to supply. So there is a difference in the way that everybody has been prepared for this wave 2. All of us as retailers have been better prepared for wave 2. All manufacturers have been better prepared for wave 2. And even consumers, unlike last time's panic, have also been better prepared for wave 2. So I see in this better preparation, which is there. The third part of it is that we are all seeing companies, and we are seeing it in the stock market. Even today, which is the 2nd of June, we have seen the stock market reach another high, where Sensex has gone to a high, Nifty has gone to a high. So what does this actually talk about? It talks about the long-term potential of the economy. The stock market is not reflecting today. It is not reflecting the next 3 months. It's not reflecting the next 6 months also, but is actually reflecting what it thinks will happen to these companies and to this country maybe 2 years from now. And that is what the stock market is reflecting. So that is another indication that the stock market believes that the long term will certainly be very good. This time, we've got much greater confidence, because last time we were fearing the disease, because we feared that if we catch the disease, nothing will save us. Now, on the other hand, because we know that there are vaccines available, because now we know that there is treatment which is possible, there is a standard protocol which is followed in terms of at which phase of the illness, what kind of treatment should be provided. The hospitals have got a lot better prepared despite all the challenges which are there. All of that is giving consumers also a little more confidence about being able to think about the future with confidence. And I think that is also one of the reasons why the stock market is going up. Because who's in the stock market? Other than a few institutions, a lot of them are also the equivalent of consumers in the stock market, who you might call investors, but they're essentially consumers of stocks. That's what they are. So, in that sense, what you are seeing is a lot more confidence on their side. And they don't believe that this disruption economically will be as bad as the disruption that we had economically in phase 1, where everything was closed. Here they believe that since everything is not closed fully, and since international markets are still open, unlike last time when international markets are also closed, so the export business continues, and that is also growing. And domestic business is not cut down fully, because it's not national lockdown, but it is state-wise lockdowns, and that is also being faced in a manner such that not all of the country is locked down at one time. So that is also assisting the consumer confidence which is there. So overall, if you ask me, I think that while we are all going through a second wave, while we've all had first-hand experiences of maybe friends and family getting affected during this particular wave, while some of us who are in the MSME sector and who are in the unorganized sector have probably got affected a lot more than people working in larger companies or in the export oriented companies. Yet, on the other hand, the confidence that all of them have continues to be strong. And that, I think, is what we as retailers should capitalize on when the opportunity to open comes up in the next maybe couple of weeks or a month, depending on the state where you are.
Thank you, sir. I think these points, that the consumption potential of India and the untapped potential that we have. You also spoke about the safety of delivery and the way we have come up with innovative ways and safe ways to deliver. That point also helps a lot in instilling confidence. Also, lockdown, state-wise lockdown is the point that you mentioned, which also gives confidence that okay, the whole country is not shut down. Different districts across the states and different states across the country, it's being done as and when it is required by the district authorities. And then the classic example of the stock market, which itself is the proof that the confidence in the Indian retail and in the Indian industry overall is extremely high. And today's the score that the stock market had today, the bullish run, is something which is a testimony of that. With this, I would like to ask you the next question, which is related to this. To achieve this success, to make a reality of this confidence, how important it is for the various stakeholders, working together or to come together for the revival of retail, all the various stakeholders coming together.
Correct. So I think see when I look at the impact, uh, and when you look at what is demand driven by, see, demand can be driven by consumption or demand can be driven by investment. Okay, investment driven demand always has a longer gestation cycle, because you think about building a road today, and by the time you actually get some work going on that, it is 6 to 8 months from today. If you think of it from a private sector opportunity, uh, you might think of making a fresh investment as a private sector company. Even that will take maybe between 6 months to a year before it comes online. So while conceptually, economically, investment driven demand is a good way to work your way out of uh, any recession, unfortunately, it is much slower working, which means that consumption driven demand is the key. Now, when we think of consumption driven demand, either we can have the government consuming or we can have the consumers, which is the private consumers consuming. The chances for the government to consume, given its own fiscal challenges, are limited. So the government will obviously have to focus a lot of its expenditure on healthcare, etc., and supporting the population, and thereby its ability to consume at a larger level is going to be limited. It will finally lead back again to private consumers to consume. Now, when you think of private consumers, two things have happened. One that you can see, if you look at all companies which are declaring the results, what you can see with them in their results is that by being able to think about costs smartly, the top 500 companies in this country have actually managed to deliver better profits in the last quarter, which is January to March 2021 versus January to March 2020, and even to the extent of better profits between October to December 2020 versus October to December 2019. So what you can see is that companies certainly are delivering better profits. But where are they channeling their profits? They're not putting it straight away into new investments. A lot of them are using those profits to be able to retire some of the debts that they had taken in order to be able to kind of exist during that first 3 to 4 months when they had absolutely no revenues. So they are retiring debts. In a lot of cases, what's also happening is employees who worked in these companies who experienced wage reductions in the first 6 months of the last financial year actually saw that the wage getting reset back to normal levels in the second financial year. And towards the end of the year, when companies discovered that they actually had done much better than what they thought, many of them actually started paying back wages for for the period April to September. So it suddenly put a lot more money, a lot more income in the hands of the employees. And that is largely middle class, that is largely the medium and the larger sectors. However, the small sector still has its challenges, and a large part of India's consumption still comes from rural India and comes from the people or in the unorganized sector, whom you might define as the SME sector. Rural India, on the other hand, last year and continuing into this year, have had a reasonably good year. So if you look at, say, for example, oil prices, oilseed prices, they're all better this year by close to between 50 to 80% higher than last year, which means realization for farmers has actually gone up. While rice and wheat and millets might actually remain the same, many of the cash crops have actually started yielding better this year versus the previous year. If we speak to a tractor company, tractor companies today are confident that given the consistent performance of the monsoon and the performance of the agricultural sector, that will help them to be able to sell more tractors. So if you look at the rural areas, what we are seeing is agricultural driven productivity and income improvements will certainly assist the rural areas to be able to retain the spending power that they had in the past. There is a temporary phase at this point of time when many of them have been afflicted because of COVID, which they didn't have last year, but that is temporary. But if you look at it on a longer term economic basis, it's strong. So large companies, export oriented companies, rural areas continue to do well. And that is approximately about 60-70% of India's consumers. Then there is a 20-25% of India's consumers, which are unorganized, unemployed, underemployed, belonging to the unorganized sector and to the small sector and to the micro sectors, who have been affected to some extent, who are largely our daily wage earners, etc. So there is a drop of income as far as they are concerned. But on the whole, you should anticipate that the consumption opportunity will continue to remain strong. And to my mind, I think will actually grow in the times to come because a lot of people, the savings rates at this point of time have actually gone up. Now, if that is the truth, how do you make sure that retailers, landlords and mall developers, governments, and companies which are supplying to the retailers, all of them actually work together to be able to capitalize on this consumption opportunity? How are we able to craft schemes which will draw the consumer, give them the confidence to step out of their homes? Because there is also the vaccination drive that is happening. And as more and more people get vaccinated, their confidence in their ability to not succumb to the disease will only increase. So once they have that confidence because of increasing vaccination, how do we get them to come out of their homes and come into stores? What is the new and interesting thing that we will do in terms of product or we will do in terms of an experience within the store or within the mall, which will draw these customers to be able to come in there? How will the government facilitate this? Will it be able to provide some kind of a GST holiday, saying that, for a certain period of time, all sales will actually have a GST holiday, which means effectively prices will be reduced for these? So, are there things that the government can do? Are there new products that companies can introduce? Are there new price points that companies can experiment with? Are there new schemes that companies can do? Are there new activities and new initiatives that retailers can take? Is there a way in which mall developers, landlords and retailers can work together so that we can draw in the customer. So there are lots of opportunities for us to work together and to be able to draw in the customer, remembering one thing, which is that the customer will have more money in his or her pocket in the next 6 months than what they've had in the past. A small percentage would have been affected, but a large proportion of them will have more money because their expenditure on many other items have actually got reduced. Holidays have been reduced, travel has been reduced. So all of that is going to finally leave them with more money to spend for themselves on products and to some extent services. So that is, I think, what we should all keep uppermost in our minds and don't go into it thinking that, oh, it's a bad season and it'll continue to remain bad. Think confidently. Think of the fact that this is our opportunity to be able to catalyze this change. And if we can catalyze this change, then certainly we can enjoy what we saw last year between November, December, January, February, etc. The same trend can happen even this year in the months to come. That's the only one advice that I have for everybody who's there.
Think confidently and catalyze the change. Excellent. I think these words are something that we all are looking forward for and to turn into reality. And sir, you spoke about investment driven demand and consumption driven demand. You spoke about all the stakeholders coming together and crafting schemes, come up with innovations, come up with experiences for the customers. And then maybe the government can chip in by GST, some holiday, etc. But the key thing is, let us be positive and catalyze the change. I think that's the message here from Mr. Bijou Kurien. And with this, sir, I would like to go to the next question, and that would be: is what are the learnings for the industry, especially the retail industry, in this crisis? There are certain good and bad learnings for each and every kind of a crisis, but we would like to know something which can, which the industry overall can uh, think about it and come up with the solutions or ensure that it is avoided in the near future. One example that you gave was that the industry was better prepared during the second wave. Now this is something which they must have learned, but overall your views on the learnings for the retail industry, sir.
So I think what we have seen and what we are learning clearly is that all of us today are very comfortable sitting around a screen and having a meeting. Okay. Now this was forced on us when the pandemic hit us last year. All of us today are comfortable sitting in our homes and working in our offices. That wasn't something that we would have ever thought of as a possibility. All of us are today comfortable sitting at home and watching a movie. Sitting at home, looking at a screen, selecting a product, and having it delivered to your house after having made the payment. So we have actually tried out and experimented with new ways of being able to do things. And I think as an industry, we should be prepared to learn new ways of doing the things that we have done in the past. So the first and the most important advice I'd give to my industry colleagues is look for change. Don't be surprised when change hits you. Look for the change. And once you see it, embrace the change. Don't be afraid to embrace. Don't run away from change. Look for it and embrace change. So that is the first piece of advice I'd like to give to all members in the retail industry. The second is that we are all talking about the apparent fight between, say, online and offline commerce. What we must remember is we are not fighting between online and offline. We are fighting for the customer. What we are each trying to do is to provide the customer with the best choices. And the customer is in a position to be able to decide what is the best for them, him or her. And what we should all attempt to do is how are we going to be able to provide the customer with the best choices, whether we are offline or whether we are online. Offline retailers are talking about digital transformations. Well and good. Online retailers are talking about getting offline and getting closer to the customer, creating closer access to the customer. Well and good. But each of us has to do what is required to be able to give the customer a better deal. That's the second part of it. The third is that we must remember customers have needs and customers have wants. We are not in the business only to service needs. We are also in the business to service wants. But how do customers' wants get serviced? By first creating a want. A need is driven physiologically. I need food because I'm hungry. Okay. But I don't need my next shirt because I'm naked. So that is a want. Now, wants have to be created by all of us so that we are in a position to be able to exploit the potential that exists in the customer, the economic potential because of the higher savings rates, the ability of us to be able to persuade somebody to upgrade their standards of living and to buy things which we think is important and they also feel is important. So that is the third aspect, saying that don't be in the position of only saying the customer needs this, I will provide it. If you do that, it will be transactional. We will never evolve. So to evolve as retailers, we should also be able to say, how do we create wants in customers when they are coming in to service their needs? So that's the third piece of advice I'd like to give all of them. The fourth is that think of it from what we have been doing. And is there any change that we have seen in what we are doing? And is there any change that we have seen in how the customer is behaving? Certainly in the last 1 year. Have we changed any way in the last 1 year, in whichever form? Whether we become a little more digitally savvy, whether we become a little more accepting of online payments, whether we have become more comfortable delivering it to somebody's homes, whether we have become comfortable doing video casting of the products within the store. Several things we have attempted. And when we attempt these, when things get back to normalcy, we shouldn't forget the benefit that these things created for us. We shouldn't lapse back to what we were doing earlier. So going back to my first point, we must see that all of these are things that helped us. And if they can help us, how do I leverage these changes that I've made in my business model, these innovations that I've created? How do we leverage it to be able to create greater value for ourselves and to be able to differentiate ourselves? So that's another area that each one of us as retailers should remember, because consumers have also changed. The way a consumer buys, the kind of products that the consumer buys, all those have changed. And those changes are things that we should recognize. And the kind of changes we made for our own business model, we should recognize. And we should be able to amplify these changes if we think it is for the benefit of the consumer. We shouldn't be keeping track of the consumer of yesterday. We should be thinking of the consumer of tomorrow and figuring out how to adapt our business model to the consumer of tomorrow. And that is something that we have to be far more foresighted in rather than being hindsighted in the way we run our business.
Excellent. Consumer of tomorrow. So, looking out for change. And this is the mantra that Bijou Kurien gives here, is look for the consumer for tomorrow rather than consumer of yesterday. Also fighting for the consumer for the betterment of the consumer, and not only servicing his needs but creating wants which will also satisfy his the wants will subsequently become the needs as per the Maslow's hierarchy. Leverage the changes and the innovation in the business model and thus create differentiation. With these, sir, these excellent points, I would come to the last question for the uh, dialogue, and that is, what's your outlook for retail in the next 6 months, let's say up to December 2021?
I think I'm very positive about the outlook for retail. Uh, Wave 2 has certainly, in terms of impact, been much lower than the impact of Wave 1. Uh, while it did create disruptions, especially for certain kinds of retailers who have been in what you might define as the non-essential category. However, on the other hand, I think our ability to be able to get back to the normalcy is much better at the end of wave two, rather than taking 3 to 4 months that we took at the end of wave one to come back to some degree of normalcy. My feeling is that we will get back to some degree of normalcy much shorter at the end of wave two. The consumer will be confident because of the fact that vaccinations are now being extended also to the 18 to 45 age group. And it is only us and our responsibility to make sure that we're able to get consumers back into our shop. So I'm extremely confident about how quickly we will be able to recover in the phase to come.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. With this, we come to the end of our leadership dialogues with Mr. Bijou Kurien, Chairman, RAI, Retailers Association of India.